Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Nigel Pollack. I'm the current president of PACFA on the 25th of November 2024. PACFA is the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia, and I'm here today with our psychotherapy representative and the convener of the College of Psychotherapy, Ernst Meyer. Welcome, Ernst.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'll do an acknowledgement of country. Acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're each sitting, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, and to their ancestors, and to acknowledge the ongoing custodianship of these lands over countless generations. So Ernst, it's great to have you here. We've been working for a couple of years now on the PACFA board. Yourself as psychotherapy representative, myself as president, and we've shared a lot of conversations about psychotherapy, about counselling, about our professions. And today's conversation is going to be about those topics, but it's going to have a very personal focus. We'll start with a conversation, hearing from you about your experience, your journey. One of the things that I've been trying to demonstrate with these interviews of counsellors and psychotherapists is that coming into this profession is a journey. We don't have a standard finish school, go to university, get a degree, do a master's, get a job. That's not how psychotherapy and counselling works. Psychotherapy and counselling tends to be something that people come back to later in life. It's something that people discover and find, and very often form a love for and a passion for, which is why both of us are here today, and why both of us are willing to spend many, many hours every week working on behalf of our professions without expecting compensation for doing so. So I really appreciate all the work you've done. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite you, if you're open to it, to share with us your beginnings, your origin story, so to speak. You know, where did it all begin for Ernst Meyer?
One of the things that I do in my practice room is I use props to create a timeline. So I have pillows, I have bottles, I have knickknacks, and I line them up on the floor. So over there is the beginning of your life, and over here, this is where we are now, and what happened in between. What tends to happen is that I have to move the birth pillow further in, because there is something that person is standing on, and that something is culture, it's religion, it's people, it's history, that kind of stuff. And as I was doing that with people, I had to often reflect or go back on reflecting on the ground that I'm standing on. So here I am, sitting on Daru country in the northwest of Sydney, and but that's not where I'm from. Right? I'm not an Aboriginal person. I'm not even a colonial Australian person. I grew up in the southeast of Germany, in Bavaria. And when Bavarians say they are Bavarians, they talk about identity. They talk about, this is who we are. We're not necessarily Germans. We are part of that nation called Germany. We travel on a German passport, but we are somewhat different. So that is expressed in language. Right? We speak a very broad dialect, which is part of, as far as the United Nations is concerned, Bavaria is a language in its own right. So if I travel 100 kilometers to the west and they go to Nuremberg or beyond, and if I speak with my dialect, they may not understand me. Right? So there's something distinct about that group of people. My father was actually a refugee. He got displaced as a child at the end of World War II, when the Soviet Red Army arrived, so they had to get out. And he settled in the southeast of Germany, of Bavaria, as a refugee. So there is my dad, a Protestant, settling in a very traditional, almost hardline Catholic environment. So there was a variation introduced into my life before I was on the drawing board. Right? These cultural differences, this disturbance of, you are a refugee, you have to find a way in this new environment. So my dad and my mum, they also stood on the shoulders of someone. And I only learned that much later in life. My dad, or my grandfather on the paternal side, he was a social democrat. He was Labour. So as far as the Nazis was concerned, he was an enemy of the state. And that had that emerged, he would have ended up in the concentration camp, and I wouldn't be here. On the other side, my maternal grandfather, as it turned out, we only found out a few years ago, he was actually in the SS. And he didn't join as a young man. He was quite mature age when he joined. And he was stationed in Ukraine. So we know that much. Right? And so World War II, Ukraine being occupied by the Nazi army and the SS, chances are that my maternal grandfather was a mass murderer. So there's additional complexity of the soil where I emerged from. So then I'm born in 1964. And I'm being raised by parents and a whole generation that was looking forward. They were concerned with survival, getting through the day, getting through life. They weren't looking to the left and to the right, and they certainly weren't looking backwards. So my upbringing was, call it functional, fairly matter of fact. So I was the only boy. I have 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and we learned to socialize really amongst ourselves. Yes, there were neighbors, but we didn't really have the connection to cousins, or to a church community for that matter. So it was a matter of learning how not to get upset, how not to feel too much. Basically, we're following the parents' example, right? They were fairly rigid in the way they were. So I got through school that way. And then when I was 16, I actually joined the police force. So we're talking 1980. Back then, unemployment was something like 10% in Germany, probably higher. So there were no jobs. An opportunity was, or one of the few opportunities was police. And that's what I did. So at the age of 16, I ended up in the barracks, where I was then for the next 2.5 years. So military style training. Right? Very scary. It was all male back then. Lots of shouting going on. Lots of punishment. Lots of physical demands, psychological demands. And I really learned there not to feel. I became even more rigid in that environment. So I did that for, 15 years? 15 years a cop. And then I came to Australia. Well, back then I had met an Australian lady, and she became homesick. So we relocated to Australia, to Sydney. And I switched career and ended up in the IT arena. And that's what I did then for, let me think, 1995 until 2018. What's that? Long time. Long time. So in retrospect, I dare say migrating to Australia was both the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life, but also the most scary. I didn't realize at the time how hard it actually was coming here to a new country, getting used to everything, really. Language, was a big deal. Trying to fit in with people was a big deal. So nothing about it really was easy. And it took me about 10 years to fully arrive where I actually remember flying back in from a Europe trip. The plane was landing at Sydney. As it hit the tarmac, I said to myself, thank God I'm home. 10-year journey. So then I guess we're moving now into more my how did I become a psychotherapist?
Well, I'll just before you go on, I'll pick a few things up and see where that takes us as you go on to the next stage, because I hear some, particularly around the journey of journey into psychotherapy. There's some themes there. There's the history, the prehistory of you, which has this kind of Protestant, Catholic, socialist, Nazi SS background, and then you're the middle son, the only son with 4 sisters, so five siblings, big household to grow up in, with a lot of influence, a lot of influence of the feminine, and within that, which is striking, is this kind of key central learning of how not to get upset, and to look forwards, to not look back, to be functional, matter of fact, which is actually quite the opposite of what you and I are doing right now. And then choosing an option that was masculine, that was achievable, was within reach, and it was secure. But it was frightening, and it was reinforcing that message. Don't fear. And you spent 15 years in the police force in Germany before meeting this Australian woman and being encouraged to come to Australia, which was a big step. But at the time, it was exciting, it was new, and it was different. But then you've had that whole experience over almost 20 years, almost 30 years now, of language and fitting in and making connections and being accepted and becoming a part of something. And you sort of skipped over the more than 20 years working in IT. It's kind of like it's just a big slab of time working in IT. And so that does sort of bring us up to this journey into psychotherapy. But if there's anything more that you wanted to comment on there, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and reflections.
You do make an important point, that I was raised in a very female environment. Right? So I had to carve out an identity as a young man, as a boy, in an all-female environment, or just about. And then when I was 16, I ended up in an environment there were no females. All of a sudden, it was all very masculine and very hardline, actually, with all the the stuff that comes with a hierarchic, male-dominated structure, very misogynistic, very chauvinistic, I'd say very racist, very uncompromising. So it was a really difficult time when I think about it now as a 16-year-old, really as a child, to be in uniform and being exposed to this, how this was actually even considered as appropriate. It beggars belief by today's standards. Right? So here we are, me working in IT, all very rigid, doing the not feeling thing as well as I could. And I noticed that I developed physical problems. I noticed when I was around 40 years old that I had pain in my neck. My muscles would lock up and I couldn't move my head for a while. I had aches and pains. And then when I had a relationship breakdown, I thought now is probably a good time to have a look at that, what's going on for me. And I ended up in, when was it, 2007, I ended up in a self-development program, which was very provoking, very body-oriented, quite provocative. Unfortunately, it was quite one size fits all. So a rigid person like me would be exposed to that, and it would have a certain impact on me. And a fragile person would be in there, and the impact would be, or could be, very different. In my case, this poking and probing is actually what I needed at the time. It shook me up. And I had an experience of feeling something. For the first time in a long time, I actually had an experience of feeling, of emotion, of being shook up. And it caught my interest. So I did another program, a longer program in 2008. And then I thought, oh yeah, I quite like this personal development thing. And then I didn't quite know what to do with myself, where to go from here. And someone pointed out to me there is a training in somatic psychotherapy with Jeff Barlow. And I had a look at it, and it said, yeah, you can do the first year of that training as personal development. And one of the things that you need to do is be in your own therapy as part of the program. So 25 hours over that year. And I remember I rebelled. I thought, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going to be in bloody therapy. What is he talking about? All right. But my interest was stronger. So I signed up, I was accepted, and I found myself in the training program for contemporary somatic psychotherapy. The contemporary part in this was a focus on relationship. More traditional body psychotherapists, they're more about doing something to a body as opposed to being in relationship. So they follow more the Reichian school. So I had an experience in a training group of, I think it was 16, of relating, which was very new to me. So then at the end of year one, the question was raised, who is going to continue on? So I thought, okay, I'm going to continue with my personal development. And I did year 2, and I did year 3. And in there, I learned about attachment theory. in year 2. And it really blew me apart to have an understanding of that my childhood was not the way I imagined it to be, or the way I remembered it. I thought, yeah, my childhood was okay. Yet really I couldn't remember any of it much. Very little. Even of my school time, I could remember very little. So an awareness emerged. I actually grew up in an emotional wasteland. And that really destabilized me. Yet in year 2 and year 3 of that training, we had to be in our own therapy again, not just 25 hours, but 40 hours in year 2, 40 hours in year 3. And that's really what held me together. That's what allowed me to, for that realization to become part of my life story without blowing me over. So at the end of that 3-year training, I had learned, perhaps embodied to an extent, 3 key learnings. One of them was have a better understanding who I am, have the capacity or a better capacity to sit with someone without upsetting easily, or not as easily as it used to be, and be with others coming from empathy. Right? So the whole concept of empathy had been introduced in my life, which probably is something that the Germans, Bavarians at the time of my upbringing weren't really practicing. So in the last year of my training, we had a lecturer who said, well, he's running a master's degree over there with that organization, and you might want to see whether you're going to be accepted. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to give that a try, just to see what happens. But maybe just to clarify, at this point, I had no intention of becoming a practitioner. I did this purely for personal development. So I enrolled, and I was accepted. So, whoa! Now I have to probably go through with it, and I did. So there was 3 years of a degree. And maybe the 2 most important things that happened there were, I found that this academic style of learning that I was now exposed to, it didn't help me at all to become a better practitioner. There was very little in there that really allowed me to advance as a practitioner. But it did allow me to, or it forced me to clarify my thinking. And if I objected to something, to actually formulate that, what actually is the point that I'm trying to make here, right? What is it that I'm going on about here? And that was very important. I didn't like it, but it was very important. The other thing that happened is that I now had a network of people who were practitioners. And from memory, one of them said to me, I know someone who might want to talk to you. So now was the time for me to join my association, the now defunct Somatic Psychotherapy Association. So I became a trainee member. I subletted a room. I got myself business cards, and all of a sudden, I was a practitioner. And then the phone rang again and again, and then all of a sudden, in 2013, I kind of moved from just being a student of this, into now practicing it. And I've never looked back.
So Ernst, you did the contemporary somatic psychotherapy with Jeff Barlow, and 1 year, then 2 year, then 3 year, and it was the personal therapy that held you together whilst you were blown apart by that experience, particularly about the exposure to attachment theory and the kind of the realization that your childhood wasn't kind of what you made it out to be. It was more of an emotional wasteland. And then you were introduced to a couple of concepts, that understanding of who you are and how you were formed, the capacity to sit with someone and to not be disturbed to an intolerable extent by that experience, and the concept of empathy, which I know is still a core part of what you do and how you do it. And then the master's degree, which didn't so much help you advance as a practitioner, but it did help you to advance and to shape your thinking. It forced you to make sense of what you already thought and to be able to articulate that to others. What was that? What was that qualification? And was it perhaps an intentional omission?
If I had to summarize what I learned, right, in all of this, was to at least try to be in relationship. Right? That was for me the key learning. But the other key learning was it's not just happening here in the left brain, intellectually, cognitively, but in all aspects of our being, right? In our physiology, feeling states, our self-beliefs, and that informs our thinking and our actions. And that then has the power to inform our physiology, our feeling states, our self-beliefs, informs our thinking. So it becomes a circular movement. And that's how change happens. So as a somatic psychotherapist, I will make the bold statement that we have a theory of embodiment that underpins our work. I'm well aware that in psychoanalysis, for instance, they don't have such a theory. They're still emphasizing the verbal, the story, the trying to make meaning of things. They don't focus on what's it like to be that person at this point in time, and what does it feel like. That's really what was the training all about, right? The first 3 years in that training program, in the relative safety of a training group, and then the intellectual exposure to something different in the master's degree, where what I've learned here had now became under pressure because it was overly intellectualized. So I had to hold that variation somehow. And so again,
what was it? What was the course? What was the title? What was
this one here?
The master's.
The master's degree. It was the Master of Applied Psychotherapy and Counseling with Jensen Newman. Okay. With Jensen Newman. So I guess I answered your question in a roundabout way. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. And it's not about, that's right. It's because it's about, where you were talking was where the real interest is, and I just wanted to sort of have a kind of a dot point to go, right, okay, that's where that was. And it was that kind of learning about other modalities. That was a part of that training, and learning that actually what you'd learned in contemporary somatic psychotherapy had a place within a milieu. It wasn't psychotherapy. It was what it was, and that there are other forms of psychotherapy with other framings that you became increasingly aware of, and led you to interrogate and reflect and make sense of where your development and where your understanding sat within that. And it sounds like you at the end of that 3-year master's degree with counselling women, you still sat quite firmly within that somatic plus relational approach.
Yeah, I did.
Feeling approach.
I did. Yet I had at the time the somatics community had fallen apart. There was a lot of infighting. 3 training programs, as far as I remember, went downhill. 2 associations fell apart. At the time, from what I remember, there were more than 200 registered somatic psychotherapists in Australia, so it was quite a significant community. But as an identity or as a relational home, they were no longer available. They were falling apart. So
yeah, such a tragic loss. I was around in 2012, and I attended might have been the last meeting of what was then called SCAPE, the Society for Counselling and Psychotherapy Educators. And it was at that time that the government had changed accreditation requirements and expectations for tertiary education providers. And so many of these small, specifically psychotherapy providers disappeared off the roadmap of Australian psychotherapy and counselling, and so went the associations that were attempting to support those ways of practicing. So, and it's a real tragedy. I mean, it's a bit of a dark spot in our professions. Over the last 25 years that PACF has been around, that was a really difficult time.
That's exactly what it was, a tragedy, and we haven't really recovered from that. If anything, we're going the other way still.
Well, we still face that kind of, and I know that this is why you and I do the work we do, because we face that threat of extinction in Australian culture, in Australian society, and that's our fight to ensure that these really valuable traditions continue to have a place, because you and I both know the incredible impact they have on the people that we work with, and that's the loss of that would be an incredible tragedy.
Well, but you know, it's forced me to have a look around. Where is a professional community that I can call home? So I got in touch with the European Association for Body Psychotherapy, of all associations, right? As an Australian or German based in Australia, and to my big surprise, I actually met their quite stringent entry requirements. They accepted me as a full member. So I think currently there's only 5 of us, and only 2 full members. So I got a bit of an understanding of how big the demands are in an international association to join. Right? It's not just a club. You actually have to bring something to the table. Right? So it stuck with me. Then I had a look at the self-psychologists, and I had a look at the relational psychoanalysts, the IR people, and I joined them both just to check them out, right? Just to get a sense of what actually is it that they are talking about, right? What is it that I can take away from those organizations? And it's interesting how associations are made up of people. So the body psychotherapists in Europe, they're very different to the self-psychologists who are predominantly still American, and very different again to the relational people who are really quite international, right? And the flavor of people and the way relationship is experienced, is performed, it's quite different. And again, it stayed with me, and it allowed me to zero in on who actually is my tribe, right? Who is my flock. And I feel very much at home with the European body psychotherapists, and I feel very much at home with the self-psychologists. So there I was, member of various associations, and I'm trying to establish who is my tribe, where's my home. So the European body psychotherapists, it's actually a broad church, right? They don't see themselves as body psychotherapy per se. They see themselves as a field of different ways of how to apply themselves as body psychotherapists. So the body psychotherapy actually does not exist. With the self-psychologists, they are the guys that come out of the tradition of Heinz Kohut. It was Heinz Kohut who let himself be inspired by Carl Rogers, amongst others, and never give him any credit for it. But he introduced empathy into this staunchly mechanistic ego psychology that was so popular in America at the time. And it came at great cost for Kohut. He was ostracized by his community. He was really kicked out as the president of the International Association. He was kicked out. Quite extraordinary. So psychoanalysis does not deal very well with dissidents. And the same happened with the body psychotherapists. You know, the founding father was Wilhelm Reich. Other figures were Sander Ferenczi, Otto Rank, these kind of guys. And they were also going against doctrine, Freudian doctrine, and they found themselves ostracized. They were kicked out. Their viewpoints were suppressed. And then the third group was that of Stephen Mitchell, the relational people, right, who really had something strong to say about how do we introduce a relational component here in our clinical practice. So what I found was with the relational people, there was no unifying factor as such. It was really much a variety of ways of thinking. And when I go to their conferences, they actually argue. They let fly, right? Whatever. So there are no restraints. It's quite astonishing how they actually conduct themselves amongst each other. The self-psychologists, they're also quite varied. There's traditionalists, there's the progressives, and there's the people in between, and then you have the Americans and you have the Europeans, right? So the glue comes under pressure at times, right? So there's an ongoing movement of change, and who or what is actually defines that change. And the same is true with the body psychotherapy community, right? It's a field, a group of different schools, right? So being exposed to that in 3 different international organizations, it has loosened my thinking when it comes to identity, right? I'm taking my, we were offline, we were talking about Donna Orange and her teaching of we need to take our theories lightly, right? Otherwise we end up in a space where we want to be right. And by wanting to be right, we start to become defensive. And then relationships break down, like with Eich, like with Ferenczi, like with Otto Rank, like with Heinz Kohut, and so on. So for me, that was the learning. Right? There were a few key figures in there. But really, what I also learned in all of this dabbling with international associations is I got a sense of what we actually are doing as practitioners. It's an application of philosophy. Yet usually we're not trained in philosophy. So the philosophical underpinnings of our work are hidden from us. We just have a certain conviction of where it comes from. We're not aware of, or not enough. So then the argument starts amongst people. Freud and Jung, they disagreed on a matter of technique or whatever it was, and they split. And that split was definite. And it's quite curious when you think about it. It was both Freud and Jung who insisted that the analyst shall be analyzed. And the only two who were not analyzed were Freud and Jung. So their issues, their personal issues, made their way into their theories. And it's carried forward as the heritage. And it keeps getting in the way. So that's the kind of the stuff that I learned by dabbling with these international communities and trying to plot myself in there somewhere. Mm. And then the road led back to Australia, to PACFA. I've been a PACFA member even when the Somatics Association still existed. But I was a passive member. I was a reluctant member. I couldn't really engage with PACFA. There was nothing that really nourished me. But I felt that there was a requirement to be in a strong association. I looked at the time briefly into ACA, but I don't know what it was at the time. They didn't click. And I saw myself as a psychotherapist, so PACFA provided a home in one form or another.
It was a good enough fit, but not ideal, and I hear that. And I've loved you talking about the different practitioners, the different theorists, Reich, Ferenczi, Rank, Koblet, Mitchell, and Jung and Freud, and that insight into the philosophy. And I didn't quite catch the name of the person that you described as the one that encouraged you to really loosen your ideology, you loosen your grip. Who was that?
Donna Orange.
Donna Orange. You want to say a bit more about Donna Orange? What's to me about Donna Orange?
So she's a psychoanalyst, or was a psychoanalyst. She passed away only a few days ago. And she also had a degree or a PhD rather, in philosophy. So she was fleshing out our philosophical underpinnings. She actually paid attention to it and spelled it out for the community. And the community wasn't necessarily overly impressed because they thought, well, here we are natural scientists, we are psychoanalysts, right? We are doing this as a science. We don't need philosophy. Thank you very much. And Donna Orange said something very different, her and her group of people. And her statement that we need to take our theories lightly is really a warning to all of us. If we get too attached to our theory, it has the power to get in the way. When we harden around our school of thinking, our training, our ideology, it can become a closed shop. So psychoanalysis in America certainly at some point was a closed shop, right? And that kind of attitude has been certainly haunting our field here in Australia. Yeah, the somatics people certainly were having the differences, and it certainly emerged in not very helpful ways. I can't talk about or on behalf of Gestalt. I don't want to talk about them, but there's differences there in the various schools that we have nationwide, and that can get in the way as well. So it's problematic.
Well, I respect that philosophical differences can lead to the rise and fall of nations because of the fundamental differences in perception of the world. And my background is an existential background, so it's more clearly rooted in philosophy. So the philosophical foundation is kind of clearer, and often psychotherapy and counselling are compared and contrasted to psychology, which few people would even stop to reflect is actually rooted in a single philosophy around determinism. And that idea that there are lots of different philosophies that can underpin who we are, or what we are as human beings, what it means to be a human being, what it means to live a good life, and what therefore we should be doing with one another in order to evoke what might be framed as having a best life, or what might be framed as even as healing, is differently determined depending upon your philosophical foundation, the core belief that you bring to the activity.
And I'm leaning out of the window here. I dare say that people living in Anglo-Saxon countries, when it comes to philosophy, are at a disadvantage. They tend to be cut off from the more contemporary developments on the European continent, and that there's three powerful names that people are not really familiar with here. One of them is Heidegger. His philosophy is about being. When we talk about Heidegger, we have to ignore that later in life he became a Nazi, and he never made any apologies for it. But his philosophy that he formed in the 1920s was very powerful, and he really put a big question mark behind the whole Greek-Roman tradition of our philosophical thinking. What he left out is the body and perception that was picked up by Merleau-Ponty in the 1940s. And the third powerful figure was Wittgenstein, with his philosophy of how we use language, how we can hide behind language games, how we can throw in technological terms to disguise what actually is it that we're trying to say here or not say. So that combination, those three thinkers, I believe is a powerful foundation for a contemporary way of working with people, whether you want to call that counseling or psychotherapy or psychology. It doesn't really matter that much. If you have that as a foundation, it allows to work differently what we often refer to as the mind or the body mind. When we have embodied human beings that they happen to think, but they also happen to feel, it allows for a different angle into that person. At the same time, we're also flesh and blood human beings, and the interaction between those two human beings forms a relationship, a field, so to speak. So that is, in my view, a contemporary form of how to work, paying attention to what's happening here, what's happening over there, and how does that play out between the two of us.
And I can't help but comment, you made the comment that the Anglo-Saxon world is impoverished because it doesn't embrace so much the broader European philosophical context. And then I can't help but be in Australia and hear that and have the insight, and even the European misses out on the entire Asian philosophical
absolutely
heritage, and then the vast array of indigenous heritages, of which here in Australia, we're really only beginning to reopen and reallow and begin to learn again from ancient, the ancient culture that has inhabited this land, for the last 70,000 years, and they bring their own insight into philosophy and the body-mind world question. The whole cosmology that has its own very, very deep roots that are very connected to living in harmony with the land. Something that in the era of climate change, we are learning that the so-called Western cultures haven't properly taken properly accounted for. We're going to be likely become known as the world destroyers through our wonderful advancement of capitalism and industrialization.
As we're talking about philosophy, I've got a book sitting on my bookshelf here, a summary of philosophy. 700 pages. 100 pages are bibliography and index. 100 pages are Eastern philosophy, and 500 pages are Western philosophy. Old stuff, predominantly, right? So that's what we are exposed to when it comes to philosophy. And also, there's 4 pages in that book about women, female philosophers. 4 pages, right? Yet the majority of people in our field are women, and they have to keep grappling with theories that often emerged out of male thinking, right? And there's a discrepancy there, and I don't think that has been tidied up. And I'd like to think in the psychotherapies, there's more of a female attitude, right? The move towards body and embodiment, not so much about thinking as it happens to be in other areas of our field. So that probably would be another big difference or variation between the psychotherapies and other practitioners. But I do acknowledge that the lines are blurry and contentious.
And then there's the juxtaposition of 2 white men having this conversation.
Exactly.
For which we are ill-informed.
Yeah.
What we can talk about, Ernst, what you can talk about, is your own philosophy of practice. What is it that sits at the heart? We've talked about the influences, but if you were to try and summarize what it is at the heart of it that you are doing or being in your practice, how would you sum that up? Over the last 6 years, I have been in a very fortunate position. I had the pleasure of working with a lot of former New South Wales and Australian police officers. So I had to engage with them in a meaningful way, meaningful for them. And I had to change the way I was working. I realized that the slow, standoffish, passive, overly verbal way of a psychotherapist was not helpful, not overly helpful. What I found was that they needed something from me, usually quickly, usually urgently. Most of those former police officers that I see, they carry a diagnosis of PTSD, and most of those have a suicide attempt. So it's always in the room. So I had to become active in the room, especially at the early stages. Right, the first couple of sessions, I'm on, I show up, and that is informed by theory of embodiment,
of how we are, how we respond to stresses. What is it that has the power to stabilize us and destabilize us as a person, as an embodied human being? It has a lot to do with trauma theory, about sources of trauma. How does it affect us? What are the actual people or environments or fields that create trauma or traumatic stress? And the third important item is the power of relationship, of staying in relationship with people. So that's the holding on to them, to not lose them, to give them a relational home that they may not have had ever since they left the police force. So there's my philosophies: embodiment, trauma theory, and theories of relationship. And with colleagues, I set up a small training institute, and we've been teaching this kind of philosophy now for 4 years as a personal professional development. Right? So that's what we believe in. That's what we believe creates better outcomes. The purely verbal, when it comes to these crisis situations, it doesn't work for first responders, let me put it that way. So that's where my focus has been. That's where my expertise is. And I'd like to see that more formally recognized, that first responders are a group in our society where suicide or where traumatic stress, chronic stress is ongoing, and it often enough leads to suicide attempts. If we were to pay attention, we would see just how much they suffer. And the very recent Royal Commission into Army Suicide provides us with the evidence of that. Yet in the field, the focus seems to be on people having to tell their story in great detail. And they get upset in the process. Right? So what I'm trying to do is do the opposite. Get them to not tell their story until they feel safe with me in the room. That's the main task. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, core of safety, well, theory of embodiment, what stabilizes and destabilizes, what's trauma, power of relationship, and something about your work with first responders, which has shaped the way you show up. And you said that you're teaching and training now, and if somebody wanted to look you up, what would they be looking for? Your training course?
iosp.com.au,
which is
the International Association for Somatic Psychotherapy.
And would they learn something different at your training than you learned in your somatic training with Jeff Barlow?
Yes, I'd like to think so. The last 10, 15 years, the field is always moving, right? There's always something going on, a new angle to have a look at people emerges. Maybe one example. A person called David Webb. He was based in Melbourne, or just outside of Melbourne. And he wrote a book called Thinking About Suicide. It's literally unknown. It is a very powerful piece of work. For starters, he's an expert in suicide, or he was an expert, because he survived 3 suicide attempts. So he engaged with that subject with great passion. He is not talking about suicidality, he's talking about people in crisis. I believe that us in the humanistic field, we are trained to deal with people in crisis, right? But it's really curious how I learned about him via an American association. They were promoting his book, not in Australia. And his book wasn't published, I believe, in Australia. It was published by a British publisher. And when he passed away last year, it was all very hush-hush. He's unknown, right? And I think that is a tragedy. So we're trying to promote that work. When we talk about suicide, we're trying to keep his memory, his philosophy, so to speak, alive, right? And that's probably something that people wouldn't learn elsewhere. Yeah, of course, I don't know what is in the curriculum of other organizations, right? But as a small organization, we can look at something contemporary. We're not bound by a strict curriculum. We can respond to what is happening out there, what needs to be addressed now. And that's probably, we were talking about the tragedy of losing all those small operators. They had that capacity to respond quickly, whereas in a university setting where you have a tight curriculum, change takes a while. It has to go through a certain cycle of development.
I really hear that humanistic thread that honors experience, the experience of a thing, be it suicide or thinking about suicide, the experience of being confronted by trauma or traumatic events or particularly violent events again and again and again, and for you, the importance of being present in the room. You said showing up, offering safety and connection, and not requiring or expecting anything else from the people that you work with until they feel safe and connected and in a state of readiness. And there's a range of theories that inform that, from trauma to all the theories that we've talked about today. What I think is often an interesting question for someone who's set up their own training organization, trains in somatic psychotherapy, and has a requirement to complete 20 hours of their own continuing professional development every year. So what do you do when you go looking for professional development? What do you look for? Where do you go? How do you find something that's new and nourishes you?
I'm very lucky that I get to sit in on our own training program, where we had different seminar leads every year, and everyone brings something different, and the group brings something different. So I keep developing along those lines.
You got some examples for us? Who's inspired you recently?
There's Jill Westland. She's done a professional development event for PACFA a couple of years ago. So she's a body psychotherapist, which really focuses on our relationship with ourselves. Right? How do we know what's actually going on for us? Right? How do we feel? What and how does it inform the clinical exchange? So she's one of them. The other one is Kathleen Stauffer. She's currently the president of the European Body Psychotherapists. She is a scientist by trade who became a body psychotherapist. So her focus is more on the clinical exchange and trauma work. She's also trained in EMDR, And she tells me that she uses EMDR sometimes when it's appropriate as a shortcut within the relationship, not as a technique, within the relationship. Right? She opened up that path. She expands the field, right? Where something that we might reject as a tool, if applied relationally, it's a different story. Right? And the third one is Slađana Đorđević. She's in Belgrade. Practitioner much younger than me, but also a forward thinker. Very contemporary. I think she's informing or advising government over there on mental health issues. So very, very powerful figure. So she promotes the Dan Siegel's wheels of awareness. I'm not sure whether you're aware of that wheel of awareness. And as you go through that wheel, if you ever happen to do it, it actually works on all of us. It allows us to pay attention to what's happening on the inside and what's happening on the outside, and how that then can become integrated. And that really is, from my perspective, is what we are working with, what we are referring to when we say the mind. It's the emotional regulatory state of a person. One could even argue that state actually makes up the person. That's what we're dealing with. That's what I'm working with.
Totality of experience. What the wheel of awareness offers is it offers a mindfulness practice where one individually becomes aware of each of the senses, the sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, external sensation, internal sensation, and because I'm influenced by Amy Van Derzen from the existential tradition, and we almost have a sense of a social self, a spiritual self, so can add those to Dan Siegel's out on the rim of the wheel, and there's also the inner space and experience of inner space and spaciousness, which I take from focusing, Eugene Benless focusing this kind of inner space and that ability to sort of be inside oneself and experience oneself almost infinitely in terms of spaciousness. And then Siegel adds that then you have the experience of not experiencing any of those things and being the experiencer itself. And then it's that what I hear you talking a lot about is that it's the sum total of that experience, and that makes up the experience of the person. You might even, as you say, that makes up the experience of the self, as a process rather than a thing.
Process. That's what we do. It's process work. A slither at a time. If I remember correctly, you asked me about a vision.
Yes.
Earlier in the piece.
Well, what I was wondering about, given what your role, which is to do your best from within the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia to lead the psychotherapy, the psychotherapy in psychotherapy and counselling. What is your vision? And in your role, in my role, I hold a vision for psychotherapy and counselling. In your role, you're able to sort of hold a vision for psychotherapy. So what does that sound like for you?
I come from a somatic perspective, right? And there's no training any longer in somatic psychotherapy here in Australia, or not a long drawn out significant training as I did it back then. Right? But what has happened is that we have this so-called turn towards embodiment. So there's others who, well, one could say they're pinching our ideas, right? Like CBT and psychoanalysis, or we could say they're being inspired by us. They're cottoning on to there's something that we are doing that they need to do, right? So there's a fertilization process happening. There are body psychotherapists who are probably quite threatened by that process, and I'm not one of them. I see myself as an educator. There's people who are coming, they want to learn, and I can provide something. I can pass something on to keep that tradition alive, for it to infiltrate their field or fertilize their field. So my vision then would be that what we do in the psychotherapies makes its way out into the community, into psychiatry, psychology, right? In all those related fields. And ideally, a psychiatrist would have a form of psychotherapy training before they let loose at the community. Right? That would be one vision. The other vision would be, if in 10 years' time, if I don't need to explain any longer what is a psychotherapist, if it has become kind of self-evident what a psychotherapist is, if I, as a psychotherapist, can be employed for government, schools, or whatever, side by side with psychologists, and if psychotherapists can actually be in private practice and can expect a stable income because of recognition, public formal recognition, I think that would be an achievement. I think that would be the one foundation for the tradition to keep going. Another important item would be to make sure that the training institutes stay alive. And that's where PACFA has a role to play. How are we going to support the few existing training providers so they can provide quality training? If we don't have that, we have a problem.
Thanks. So the vision is what we do. The psychotherapist makes its way into the related fields of psychology and psychiatry, as well as through counselling. I personally happy to put on record that psychotherapy absolutely populates what counselling is. Counselling borrows absolutely from the psychotherapist. Counselling borrows from psychology. Counselling borrows from psychiatry. Counselling kind of represents that cobbling together of what can work, and we are really accepting with counsellors that every counsellor, just as with every psychotherapist, but with every counsellor, they'll be their own kind of counsellor. And that's what I think counselling is very much about, that cobbling together. And so that's really pleasing to hear that that's part of your vision too, that psychotherapies make their way out into the world wherever they might be helpful. That, it's like you don't need to explain what a psychotherapist is, that psychotherapists get a job, psychotherapists can run a private practice successfully, and that the training institutes, and I'd like to add that not only do training institutes thrive, but they grow, that we are able to sort of create a space where institutes like yours, newly emerging institutes, can emerge and have a go, and if people like it, they survive, and that's able to be supported. What I would like to do is just put you on the spot and tell me, explain to me what a psychotherapist is.
If you step into a room of psychotherapists and you ask for a definition, you're going to get multiple answers, and they're all correct to an extent, at least. Maybe let me approach the question differently. Maybe let me approach from the term psychotherapy. I believe that psychotherapy is another opportunity to learn. It's for someone at some point in life to step into a room and touch something that hasn't been developed or is not working for them. They want to learn something different. They want to do something different. And that happens via a conversation. There's a dialogue happening. but not just a verbal dialogue. It has something to do with that whole system that I talked about earlier on, the physiology, feeling states, self-beliefs, thoughts and actions of the therapist and that person over there. And the tool of that conversation is the psychotherapist. It's us as a person. So we are obliged as psychotherapists to make sure that this tool keeps being developed with our own therapy, with our own supervision, with our own professional development, our personal development, expanding our field of interest. Because what we're doing really is not a technique or an application of tools. Really, we're sitting somewhere between the arts and the sciences, right? It's a craft, right? And in the psychotherapies, the emphasis of the psychotherapist is on that person, like an artist almost, right? So the art can be performed or developed, passed on. So, and that goes. It's very, very different to just engage with someone verbally or just note down symptoms. We're talking about a developmental process, and it's actually mutual. It's going to shape both of us, and the two of us, you and I, we're not the same people any longer that we were an hour ago. We have this dialogue, this backwards and forwards, and we take things in, and we have to think about things, and we have certain reactions to it, whether we are aware of them or not. But there has been change already. We're not static. And I'd like to think that in the psychotherapies, we pay more attention to this stuff that happens under the radar. So that was a long drawn answer to a very difficult question that a lot of people have been arguing over for a long time.
Oh, and it was lovely because I feel like I've received something meaningful, which I want to share back with you, because I want to get the mirror, because what I heard is that a psychotherapist is a tool to facilitate a developmental process that provides the opportunity to learn about the whole of oneself and one's experience of the world.
In relationship with others.
In relationship with others. So the final question that I have is, what then are the issues? What are the obstacles? What are you confronting? Well, I guess both. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? But also, what are the opportunities?
Well, there's a question without an easy answer. We would like to see, we as in the leadership group of the College of Psychotherapy, we would like to see more people in the college. At the same time, we would like these people to also meet the requirements, the training requirements, the requirements in personal therapy and so on, before they can join the entity that is currently representing the profession. And that has become problematic with that push towards learning in a university environment, intellectually, writing essays, probably with limited number of experiential learning. Some of the training providers have not been helpful by selling or marketing a product that really is a counseling degree with a subtitle of psychotherapy that blurs the line. That is problematic. What is also problematic, I think, is the matter of professional identity. Because we're living in an English-speaking country, we are exposed to a lot of the noise that comes out of an English-speaking community, especially America. So we have medical doctors, we have psychiatrists, we have psychologists who publish books, and they speak on behalf of psychotherapy. But from my perspective, they're not. They're not trained in the field. It may just be that they do a form of psychotherapy, but they haven't undergone the formational process, or many of them anyway. So it blurs the line. It sets up a certain expectation here in Australia, who or what is a psychotherapist, right? And I don't think we have been very good over the years, the long years, of actually formulating that. That gets in the way. So there has to be a solid re-education process or information process, and that has to come from within the college. And the big issue is what actually makes it liable or valid to go through that long drawn-out process of becoming a psychotherapist. I mean, if you want to be a clinical psych, I think you have to do 6-7 years, something like that. If you want to be a psychiatrist, probably much longer. All right. So
that's eight at least, maybe 7 or 8 for a clinical psychologist.
So as a psychotherapist, you're looking at bachelor's degree plus your training, so 6 years. All right. It seems, it's a long time, and it's supposed to be a long time. It keeps us on the boil. It allows for change to creep up on us. Right? And we have the opportunity to work on our own stuff. It's important because ultimately we will be sitting with people who are amongst the most disturbed of the community, the most fragile, suicidal, right? We have to be able to hold that. We have to be able to hold them without giving in on the temptation to ring 000 prematurely. Right? So it's important that we go through this developmental process and that we actually promote it, that we don't see it as something negative, but we say, no, this is actually a good thing because you're going to know more about yourself, and you probably, well, most likely are going to be a better practitioner, because otherwise, what's the point? Right? You're going to be a more rounded human being, ideally anyway.
I think this is a good junction, a good point in our conversation to dig in a little bit deeper to this idea, because I think this is a challenging idea for training, for education, for what we have levels of the Australian qualifications framework run by TEXA, the Training Education Quality Standards Authority, and this formation, this development of a person that becomes a psychotherapist, not because of the knowledge that they've ingested, not because of the skills that they've learned, but because of the person that they've come through, the process that they've been through, a process that included for you personal development, being shaken up, being blown apart, and then being held throughout that journey. And implicit in that being shaken up and blown apart is a reformation. And part of that reformation you've described as part of it can be kind of a holding on, a tightness, and then part of your formation is also a loosening and an opening up. And you've also described it in terms of connecting with all of the different aspects of experience, of what it is to be a person. What would you, if anything, what would you add to that? It takes time.
Maybe I can give you an example. So as when I was a police officer, I wasn't a tank, but I was fit, and I was physically strong, and I was also very rigid. I brought that body, if you want to use that term, with me to Australia. right? And I still had that firm, tense body, which caused me physical pain. When it came under pressure, I started to shake. Right? And I went through a phase of shaking in the training room and also in the therapy room, which lasted for, I'd say, for 6-7 years, until after one training session, it ran its course. I had settled. I'd shaken it out. The tension was gone. I feel comfortable again in my body. Right? Being in a very rigid structured body was not comfortable. Right? So letting go of that, or living that transition from something very stern to something much softer, it took time. And that's probably maybe the biggest challenge that we have in the psychotherapies is time. People don't have time any longer. It's more difficult to make time. We have mobile phones that grab our attention. Sitting down and reading a book is not that easy any longer. We're constantly distracted. Right? So sitting with ourselves, by ourselves, has become an issue. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, it gives me an example of how you as a psychotherapist experienced your formation. That 6 to 7 years of shaking out. And in particular, I like the language of becoming comfortable in one's body, and also comfortable. Part of that comfort in one's body was comfort in one's body in the world, and comfort in one's body in the world with others, and feeling, and particularly when you're faced with an individual who you work with a lot with what's described as, or what's diagnosed as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's an experience of having become very uncomfortable in one's body, and probably being very uncomfortable with other people, and probably very uncomfortable with the world as well. And so part of your formation is to be able to sit comfortably with a person who is sitting in such deep discomfort or distress, and to be able to experience that distress through empathy without being discomforted by it.
Bang on, Nigel. You just mentioned my definition of so-called mental health. It's when we can sit comfortably enough with discomfort without getting dysregulated.
Yeah,
that's it.
Thank you.
That's it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we finish?
I just would like to thank you for your time and for inviting me in the first place. It was a bit daunting, because I'm still, when I think about the Jeff Barlows of this planet and others, I'm still a newbie, right, as far as practice is concerned. But I guess that goes with the trade. We enter the field later. Right? We bring life experience to the table, and that counts for a lot, I'd say.
I tell my master's students, you're just at the beginning. You've taken the first step on a journey that's likely to last a lifetime.
Maybe another comment. My supervisor, he's pushing 80, right? And he keeps climbing, he keeps getting better, he keeps climbing to the top, and then he reaches the top, and then he sees the next mountain peaks. So the development never stops. We always need to be prepared to keep going, which is probably the reason why we need to keep our theories slightly.
There is no end point, there is no finish, there is no perfect when it comes to being a human being on planet Earth.
That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Ernst Meyer, for your time and for your generous sharing. And I hope that the people listening in enjoy what you've had to share, because I certainly have. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel.